now tapped in with the introspective father and son duo. Last name may be strange, but never strangers to the game. Adjust the listening devices and keep it loud.
Coming in, flex. I just wanna win, LABB, who we running with, 2233, I'm on 10 again, state your name.
Hello, and welcome to another installment of No Strangers to the Game. Today's episode is entitled Black Church. We're going to be discussing the role the Black Church has played in our communities and our lives, but the role it's played for African Americans in this country for a very long time and where we should go from here. But first, let's de-stress. Obviously, a very long week if you were paying attention to the election. How was your week?
My week was actually pretty productive. Project getting ready to start, so I was able to get through some of the hurdles and challenges that were ahead. So we're building a park in an area that's disadvantaged. It's about 4 acres. It's 2 phases, so it's really a 15-acre park, 14 acres. But because of the funding limitations, we're going to start with the first 4 acres. And as funding becomes available and we have access to it, then we'll do the additional 10 acres. So that's jumping off in the next few weeks. Contracts are being signed and executed. All the documents that we need are coming in. So it's getting exciting to be able to get some tractors and, equipment out there to start moving dirt around and make some stuff happen. As far as the election goes, that's been interesting to say the least.
Very interesting.
And I'm looking at it and I don't feel any excitement. I feel somewhat, on some level, a relief that, we don't have to continue down the path that we're going, but I ain't all that excited and confident in what we got.
Yeah,
to move forward with.
I saw a podcast where Charlemagne the God was talking about it. He said, he's like, I really didn't love either option, obviously. I mean, it's the same old. These just 2 old white guys running to run our country. But he said what Trump represented was a further spiral into hatred, division, and a lot of bad, things that we didn't need. And what Biden represented was at least the opportunity for change, because I think you can talk about Biden's past and you can say the things that he may or may not have done. But I think what he's shown is that even if it means just to win an election, and maybe even if it's to win re-election next term, he's willing to work with us on some things and to at least listen to people. And so hopefully it's not all lip service, but I do believe that he did represent a lot more positive things than the other candidate. So, I mean, I'm not, and like you said, it's not like, oh, thank the Lord we got Biden in office. It's just more of a relief of thank the Lord we got the other guy out.
Yeah, well, now it becomes very important and critical for us to hold them accountable. And that really becomes part of our job. It's not, okay, well, now what do we do? No, we got to hold them accountable and make sure that whatever our agenda is, that we put it in front of them and say, this is what we need, or, you won't be here for the next one. Because really in some of those very urban centers, they changed and they made the difference, in that election, in Atlanta and Pennsylvania with Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, where you have a high concentration of Black voters. And, so we owed some things and we need to go get that. That's all I'm saying.
Well, let's jump into today's topic. I want you to just briefly describe to me what role the Black church has played for African Americans in this country since, I guess the establishment of the first Black church, or however long, Blacks or African Americans in this country have been gathering in places of worship, or, houses of God, if you will.
Yeah, I was, I'm kind of thinking on that. And what I discovered or read up on is that the first Black church in America was the first African Baptist church, and it was founded in 1773. Prior to that, there were, congregations and organizers and getting together, but to actually have an official church, that was the first one. And I know the African African Methodist Episcopal was one of the first churches that really sprung out of the Free African Society that was in Philadelphia. So during that time when Reconstruction and even part of slavery, you had a lot of Africans or those that were enslaved began to migrate up north as they ran away, and Philadelphia was that spot to where they had the Free African Society. And from that, the African Methodist Episcopal kind of formed out of that, in which they were basically, the community center. They were the educational component, the school, and they, with the jobs. So they were basically just about everything to the Black community. And I've always looked back and I looked at the strongest components in the Black community since we've been here. And I think of two of them. One has been the Black woman and then the Black church. And the Black church has been historically a very prevalent and prominent, institution in our community. And, it's done a lot of things that help us to move forward to some of the progress that has been made over the years.
Just something that came to mind as you were speaking. I mean, why of all things was that kind of, I guess, the first thing that we were allowed to have? We obviously couldn't read, we couldn't write, we couldn't buy land, we couldn't own land, we didn't have rights. we had zero rights. Why do you think we were allowed to be able to at least, I guess, have churches or be able to congregate in those ways? What was the motive or the reasoning for allowing that?
I don't know 100%, but I think it was just one of those things that we have to culturally make sure that these people kind of have a set of rules and guidelines that help them to be morally, I guess, sound, morally, good people, so that we can function with them. And I think with the Black church is that we often got more out of the church experience than those who kind of presented it to us. And there were some on both sides who, give them church so that we make sure they're sound and that they're law-abiding, God-fearing people. And then there was others saying, well, I don't know. They may take this church thing and be able to do some stuff that's not going to be in our benefit. So I think for the most part, it was probably, I would consider, the most safe way of refining, the Black community and using church as a tool to do that.
Yeah, I know, because I asked because I know I've heard like things about the traveling pastors back then and how they were a lot of times, tools used by, oppressors or back then that would, like you said, really just kind of spread messages that weren't necessarily beneficial to, Black folks. It was more so for, the oppressor to keep them oppressed.
But keep them oppressed, you give them hope. I got to have hope, because if I ain't got no hope, there's no point in me getting up tomorrow. I'm just going to go either kill you or kill myself. You know what I mean? So hope, and at the same time, to make sure that you have a moral compass to be able to function in this environment to where, your thoughts are more in line with the thoughts that I have as being a good person and looking to the great beyond and, heaven and all those things, which I think was used to manipulate on some level, but it also gave us hope. And in our spirit, African people were always spiritual in terms of how they looked and viewed the world. And I think we took that and used it and took it beyond what, the initial expectations were as it related to, church and our experience.
So bringing it more recent, in the last 100 years, I think obviously that's recorded history, right? We've got video, we've got, a lot more things that we know about that time period. I think when I look back, I wasn't alive in the 60s or back then, but I look at it and I say Black church was where our leaders came from. Martin Luther King was a pastor of a church, and Reverend Jesse Jackson, all these people, they were, and that was, like you said, that was the community center. It was where we would, rally for political purposes, where we'd come together and, worship, all of those things. How would you say that's changed since that time? Since, those 60s, I guess, since since we have been able to really look at history and record it?
I think there's still a large number of churches that function and serve in all those roles, but I think there's many more that don't, for various reasons. Maybe just don't have the leadership and the economic capacity or the wherewithal to be able to provide all those services and all those activities. And then there's also other agencies, organizations that have sprung and become separate and secular from the church that provide those services. So you have a lot of nonprofit organizations, you have community development corporations that serve to help with job training, education, even in housing, as well as some political organizations that help to organize people from a political standpoint. So a lot of that has been, I guess, not taken from the church, but other organizations have sprung up to be able to provide those services and meet those needs where the church may not be able to or doesn't have a need because there's another agency that's doing that.
Yeah. And what do you think in terms of as people begin to, through time, people's beliefs change. And I think we're in a period of time where a lot of people are rejecting old ideas. What do you think that has to do with the state of the Black church in terms of it's different from 20, 30 years ago or 50 years ago?
Well, I think the church in general, not just the Black church, but, things that I read and study or, membership is declining throughout, particularly with Christianity. And as we know it here in America and how the church is reformed and the churches were something that most people attended. And for various reasons, I think part of it is that the church didn't adapt to what was going on in the secular world. And so you have people who are younger and younger generations who have access to so much information and technology and are challenging some of those ideas. And the church over the years did not make the adaptations and adjustments to be able to, I wouldn't say change their message, but to be able to more effectively deliver a message in ways in which the younger generation would be able to either receive it or at least be, willing to consider. And so for me, I think those are some of the reasons that the church is declining. Just the fact that you have access to so much more information and there's so many more questions. And sometimes, or I should say the church just hasn't made those adjustments in a manner that, has, I guess, would lead to
success.
More successful, I guess you would say.
It's funny because I think of a J. Cole song he talks about, and the song is called Javari. And he talks about, and there's a line where he says, all of that to say maybe the hood need a new faith, a new story about a boy from not too far where you stay. And so I always think about that, where he's like, that message, with the Bible and things like that, not to completely throw it out, but how relatable is it now in today's times? But I wanted to get into, and this is always a funny topic, church and economics. And do they go together? Should they go hand in hand? We always talk about, you tithe to your church. Where does that money go? I don't know. But what role has it in the past, and what role should the Black church play in the economic sustainability of the Black community?
I think the church should have a big role economically. And the reason I say that is because when you look at the various denominations where you have, I think, the Baptist Convention, you have the AME or the Methodist Convention and the Kojic, where they have several million members worldwide.
Wow.
Where you have essentially a captive audience. And let's make sure we understand that the church, there's the spiritual side of the church, and then there's the business side of the church. When you have a building, there's bills to be paid, all those things. And I think, for me, over the years, I always felt like someone was trying to take advantage. Just tell me, hey, the bill's got to be paid. I get that part. And sometimes they try to, fuse the spiritual and the business, and it always felt kind of misleading, like, somebody's trying to get one over. I understand the business side and bills have to be paid. Let's do that. But I think at the end of the day, with having so many people that are essentially a captive audience, that we have opportunities to have services, we have products or what have you, or goods that could be used to serve those population of people and expand beyond. And I think economically, that's one of the things we may want to consider. I mean, think about a credit card. I mean, the banks, and I say the banks, the churches put millions of dollars a week into various banks across this country, probably globally. Imagine having those banks or those churches that had credit cards for their membership, right? And that for every dollar they spent, a percentage of that goes back into that Black community for whether education, whether it be housing, whether it be, you name it, business loans, and those type of things in which we'll be able to help serve our community. I think economics is a big part of the church, and we should utilize that and leverage the congregations and the memberships to be able to do those things in our community. So I think, yeah, it should be a big part of the church as well as the spiritual development.
Okay, that's the positive outlook, and I'm gonna be negative. I'm gonna do that right now.
Okay.
So I heard somebody say the Pope takes a vow of poverty, and yet he lives in the biggest, nicest house in Rome. Now, I say that because a lot of times we both grew up going to Black churches. We've seen a lot of Black churches, been to a lot of Black churches. A lot of times they're not in the best communities. A lot of times the members aren't, in the best place economically. But in a lot of situations, the pastor is driving a nice car. He lives in a house that's pretty nice, paid for in a lot of different situations by the church. And so I think sometimes you wonder if there should be that separation of church and state, if you will, in terms of the economics, because I guess not currently, but throughout history, I think sometimes, like you said, there has been people that have taken advantage of the situation, and especially when it's damaging, because it's especially when it comes with trying to mesh the spiritual with the economics and try to make it seem like it goes hand in hand, when in reality, no, they don't. It should be completely separate. So I think a lot of people sometimes are turned off because of what they see and what I just explained. And so is there, like I said, and I see what you're saying about the being able to utilize the membership and, the congregation, but is there realistically a way to get over a lot of the bad things that people have seen and felt throughout history?
Yeah, it's definitely a way to get over it. I mean, I always believe there's a way to get over just about anything. And this is this one. It just comes down to having the will and the desire and the strategy to hold people accountable. Oftentimes when, those pastors who get away with certain things, so to speak, or take advantage of, their power or leadership, there's always a way to hold them accountable. You can't be a leader if you're not leading anyone. And those people that are in those congregations to be educated and informed and aware and ask those tough questions. And be able to say, nah, something about that don't sound right.
But see, that's the difficulty of it, right? Is that a lot of times the way we're brought up in the Black church is almost the opposite. Don't question nothing. You give 10% of your tithes and you going about your day. You don't ask where that money went. You know what I mean? He gonna do what he gonna do with it because he's, the shepherd. He's the man of God. And I think a lot of times, like we said, they try to make it go hand in hand, and people fall for that because it's hard not to when this is somebody, I guess, who has been seen since your childhood.
Well, here's what I would say to that. If those things are to change, it's going to take people like yourself and younger generations who seem to be aware and willing to ask those questions.
But see,
right?
But see, the tough part about that is if you're asking me, and I think a lot of other people in my generation, we saying, well, forget the church. We'll do it on our own. We'll do it outside of the church because that a lot of times can blind people. Right.
But one thing you got to understand with the church, it has an infrastructure. You know what I mean? That's already established. So one thing I realized with particularly woke people and conscious community is that we seem to work in a way and where we're pulling people away from where they're already gravitating to. How do we take what's existing? How do we leverage it and use it and rebuild it to help us in the ways that we want it to? It may not be perfect, but it's there. The infrastructure is there. It's just now, how do we get in there and make sure that it works for the good of all of us? And I don't want to cast dispersion and a bad light on church or churches, because there are a lot of churches that are doing some of those things. Yeah. But there has also been an overwhelming number of churches and pastors who have taken advantage of it, and people have stepped away because it's they just don't want to deal with some of the nonsense that has happened and that they've been exposed to. Another thing that has happened with the Black church is through gentrification and through communities that are changing demographically. They're in places in which, there used to be predominantly Black community that's no longer a predominantly Black community. And so back in the day when I grew up, when you used to walk to church and you're right around the corner, it made it very convenient. Your mom could send you or they can go and it wasn't a big deal. But now that you're moved out and you're further away from that church, it's not as convenient getting there. So if you 15, 20 minutes out or whatever, 30 minutes out, you may not be, I wouldn't say able, but you may not be attending as often. You may not be sending your kids around there to Sunday school and all the other things, because that requires you to get up earlier. That requires you to make an extra effort. Whereas before, it was just a lot more convenient because you were right there in the vicinity of the church.
Okay, well then I'm getting two different messages a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, okay, for one, yes, the church is an established infrastructure, and there is still a very, good number of people who go to church and they are bought into that system. But like you said, I think a lot of people in my generation are starting to kind of pull away from it, gravitate away from it. I think there's a lot of other factors at hand that are causing the decline of our churches, like I said, in general.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this seems like an uphill battle. Why not do some of these things, at least from the economic sustainability standpoint of our community, outside of the church, if it feels like doing it within the church may be even a little bit of an uphill battle?
So what suggestions would you have?
That wasn't the question.
I mean, like I said, and I'm not going to sit here and say the church is perfect. I have a lot of challenges and issues that I have with the Black church. But I do see it as something that is there, who has been there for years from an infrastructure standpoint, organizing, being able to connect and get people together, has the history and has the experience, as long as with, property and locations and places where people can meet and convene to do certain things. And so, and it may not be as critical in terms of meeting at the location as it was in the past because of Zoom and all the other technology that we have. And in the light of COVID, we're seeing that most churches are not even being able to get together. And so, what are some of the things you can do with those resources from an economic standpoint, with those buildings and those properties? Are they in the right place to serve the people that you have been serving for, many decades? Do you need to look at maybe, hey, let's maybe sell this, let's maybe leverage this property or what have you, so that we can align in places where most of the people that we serve are there. And so there's a lot more discussion that needs to be had that I'm not equipped to discuss. But I think those are some of the things that we need to begin to consider so that the Black church can, really do its job at serving the Black community. And some will even ask, now, should there really be a Black church in that sense, or should it be more of a diverse church community in which, various people from different backgrounds come and worship there? So I think the Black church and just the church community in general has a lot of things to kind of look at and address because of the changes and the dynamics that are occurring right now.
Well, that was my next question, is what is that next step in evolution? You talked about some of the things that could be a possibility, but in your opinion, what is the best, next move, your best move? If you're the leader and, you kind of, let's say you oversee all the Black churches in the country for whatever reason. I don't know how you would do that, but let's say you were in that role. What's your mandate? What is your first, step to make that evolution a positive one and to start making real change?
I guess I would step back and just look at it from a business standpoint first. Where's this church at? Is the population or the congregation growing, declining? Is it in a location in which the people that I serve are there, right? So I have to look at it, and each location is going to be different. There are churches that are in urban environments that are probably going to still have a large number of the Black community that is there. Places where it's probably more suburban, or areas where the demographics have shifted, that may not be the case. And so you have to look at it and say, okay, what are the strengths and the weaknesses of this particular church and this particular location? And how do we leverage what we have to be able to contribute and be effective in serving those people? As a whole, comprehensively, I think we would look at it, if we're talking specifically the Black church, what is it that our community needs, right? And you and I talked about this, and this is something I've said, countless occasions. But for me, I think the areas that we should really focus is looking at housing, looking at education, criminal justice reform, health and wellness, and access to capital and wealth. And looking at the churches and say, how in these 5 areas can we address those issues and move those the agenda forward to make sure that we can, make those things happen in a way that are, in our benefit.
Well, let's take one of those areas, and I'm putting you back on the spot. You give me your politician answers. You're not going away from it.
I ain't worried about it.
From a sense of criminal justice reform, let's say, for instance. No. I want to stay on the economic sustainability, access to capital, wealth. How do we use our system of Black churches to help in that aspect?
First thing I can think of is that each Sunday or Monday or Tuesday, you have countless Black churches depositing money in the banks, right? Whatever cities or region they're in. Go to those banks. First of all, may even consider, is it possible for those churches to either establish or say, you know what, we're going to go with this particular bank. And in the fact that we're going to deposit millions of dollars each week into this bank, whether it's Bank of America, whether it's Chase, whether it's Wells Fargo or whatever, or starting their own, we got X million dollars every week that we're going to deposit into your bank. So as a result, we want you to serve us in this way. We want business loans at reasonable interest rates or low to no interest rates. We want loans for housing, also for education and putting back and investing in our communities. That's the first thing I would do, is look at how can we make sure that those dollars that are being deposited in those banks can go back into the communities that serve our people.
Well, I can think of a few of those, I guess, types of churches, right? You've got AME, like you said, Kojic, and they all kind of at least have the structure, right? And so it all comes, there's a leadership of each of these. Why not create a coalition of, these Black churches or these types of churches and say, hey, we're going to put it, like you said, put our money into, whether it be a certain other bank or even if we put it into a Black owned bank, to help in that aspect. And then, like you said, we're doing things. And then I think, because when you talk about those 5 areas, I'm on the tip of a lot of our problems can be solved with wealth and capital. We can do a lot of things with wealth and capital. So if we're taking all of that money and we're using it to, hey, we're going to start a scholarship fund and it's going to actually service our community and a lot of our kids are going to benefit from it. Healthcare. I'm thinking on a national scale, on a national scale, can we do something like, can we have healthcare, like black church healthcare? I don't know.
We could imagine it. It's something we'd have to sit down and think about and sit down and walk through it. So I think that's a great idea, because, when we look at, proportionally or disproportionately, we have been affected health-wise in our communities, even with COVID. At least from statistics that largely people of color, Black people in particular, have been impacted more so than other groups. And so let's look at that. There's a lot of smart people in these churches and organizations that I think if we really sit down and focused on it, put a think tank together and organize ourselves, we could do it. It's just a matter of having the political will, or should I say just the will in general, and getting the leaders of these organizations to be able to sit down and agree to looking at it and finding ways to make it happen.
Well, I agree. I think we're both on the same page that there's steps that need to be taken for the Black church to remain viable with the changing climate, you know, with how people are even viewing church in general, not just black churches, but just church in general. And there's a lot of evolution that needs to happen. And then I think that can lead to, you know, hopefully if we do things correctly and if things are able to organize, that can lead to us addressing a lot of the issues we need to address within our community because we're using that already established infrastructure. So I think we all agree on that. And yeah, I mean, like you said, I think we can go from there on that. I'm a little more optimistic about that because I think before I always looked at church as something that didn't need to go, but definitely needed an overhaul. I mean, for me personally. So that gives me a little bit more of an optimistic look at things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I really sat back and I looked and kind of analyzed our community. I analyzed our status and our position here as Black people in America in particular. And I look at that, there's very few industries that we don't have an impact on, whether it be generating the revenue as employees or as the intelligence. I mean, think about sports. When you think about basketball and football, if you take away Black athletes, those organizations will look a lot different, right?
Yeah.
You take entertainment, music in particular. If you remove Black people from there, that's going to look a lot different. And those industries, there's a ripple effect of jobs that are created as a result of basketball players. When you think about now, with a lot of the sports leagues are having games with no fans, how much money is being lost, one, two, but how many jobs are also being lost. And so those people that don't have those jobs can't go into those stores, into that local, area and spend money. And so that area is being greatly affected and impacted by that. And so when I think about us and our impact here in America, we've always had an impact, you know, from the days of slavery, just building and providing the free labor for this country to grow and develop. And it hasn't changed. I mean, when you look at the prison industrial complex, and I know I'm going into a whole nother field, the prison industrial complex, you know, and you look at the disproportionate number of Blacks, African Americans that are in prison, you know, there's still services and, you know, virtually free labor that are being provided for, you know, those private prisons, you know, and then the jobs that are being created, you know, there's communities in these rural areas who look to have prisons to create jobs and build economic development around that. So we have to really understand our impact and how we affect the things around us in many different ways and be able to leverage that so that we as a community can benefit from, you know, the fruits of our labor.
Yeah, well, that's the key. I'm learning in business, leverage is everything. So I think this is something we could talk about for a very long time, but I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode. We appreciate everyone for joining us and listening in, and we hope you join us for the next one.
All right. Peace.
Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're notified every time we post a video.